It's time for The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening review for the Nintendo Switch. Many of you may know Zelda is my favorite Nintendo franchise, and quite possibly my favorite game franchise of all time. However, that doesn't necessarily mean I've played every Zelda to date, and this game is a good example. Granted, I'm referring to the original on Game Boy. However, upon research, the Switch version is the same game with a handful of small gameplay differences, an HD upgrade, and a different coat of paint. Did Link have a wonderful dream, or a terrible nightmare? Let's find out. Seeing how A Link to the Past is my favorite 2D Zelda as of this review, it was exciting to play this direct sequel. As the game begins, we see Link battling a torrential storm in the middle of the ocean. After his ship gets torn to shreds, we see a young girl notice an unconscious Link washed up on the beach and takes him into her care. Upon waking, Link learns he is on Koholint Island and that monsters have recently shown up and are causing trouble, and being the hero that he is, Link decides to investigate. This is probably the shortest Zelda game I've played, but that doesn't mean you'll be able to finish it in a couple of hours, unless you're speedrunning. My first playthrough took me about 18 hours to finish, and I didn't complete everything. I feel like the most noticeable game design difference compared to many Zelda games is that getting to the next main area doesn't take much effort. In most Zelda games, you usually have to perform certain actions or travel to specific areas first before you can access the main location you're trying to get to. In Link's Awakening, this game element is still present, however, it's like a mini version. The majority of areas you need to get to require, let's say, a completed chore first, instead of a grander mission that could push the narrative. It's not a bad thing, and I understand the Game Boy version was quite limited in game space, but if you're expecting a list of tasks to perform before you can enter the next dungeon, it's not really this at all, and, dare I say, is kind of a breath of fresh air. Sometimes I just want to progress to the next area without having a laundry list of things I must complete first. I can't help but think of Twilight Princess and all the tasks you had to finish, areas to visit, NPCs to talk to before you could enter the main dungeons. Now, I'm not saying Twilight Princess's formula is a negative thing. The point is that this game doesn't have this mechanic to the same degree as other Zelda titles, and depending on what you like and or expect from a Zelda game, you might find that it's quite relaxed in what it requires from the player. One thing you might notice that plays into how fast it seems to take to beat the game is how easy the first few dungeons are. You don't have to have much, if any, experience from playing other Zelda games to notice the lack of challenge. Certain drops can make the game even easier, as in the case of the Piece of Power and Guardian Acorns, which double damage output and decrease damage taken by half respectively. They also boost your speed for a short time, and while they're fun to find, I feel like they shouldn't drop as often as they do. If they were about 50% rarer, it would have made it more special to find them. Of course, it's standard game design to ease the player at the beginning, but I feel like the overall difficulty could have been ramped up a bit. The majority of difficulty comes from trying to remember the dungeon layout until you get the map. Most rooms have a few minor enemies, with or without some sort of puzzle. I thought it was kind of cool to see that small keys can not only unlock doors to new rooms, but also remove giant blocks restricting access. This sometimes made it optional in which route you wanted to take, something I quite enjoyed. The most unique rooms were the ones where the game moved into a 2D side-scrolling perspective. Link can still use his items and weapons, and it's a nice little change from the top-down view. The graphics are quite cute, and displays a charm that no other Zelda has. Link can only move in 8 directions, and this took me some getting used to as you use the analog stick to move around, and the transition from moving in a cardinal direction to an intercardinal direction isn't exactly fluid. It doesn't cripple the player, but I can see how it might irritate some in the beginning until they get used to it. Using items is done with only the X and Y buttons, meaning you only have access to 2 items at a time. This was standard back in the day, but if you've never experienced a 2D Zelda like this, you might get annoyed by the inconvenience of having to open up your inventory every time you want to use a third item. Thankfully, the majority of the game doesn't require you to constantly switch out items, and some have passive effects, such as the flippers, allowing you to seamlessly transition from walking to swimming whenever you want. Most of the boss fights were quite easy, especially the recycled bosses from other games. Even the new ones weren't difficult to quickly figure out. Maybe there were complaints back in 1991 about how A Link to the Past was too difficult and they toned down the sequel. I don't know, I'm just guessing here. Point is, Link's Awakening probably has the easiest Zelda bosses I've ever faced. Even though much of the game doesn't have too much core challenge, I never really got bored as there was quite a lot to do besides the main quest, something I highly appreciated and was kind of caught off guard given the small map size. Examples being fishing for the biggest lonker, get-rich-quick whitewater rafting, and testing your skill at this fun, yet sometimes infuriating crane game. Whatever! I totally had that! The most unique thing to do is a new addition the original game didn't have. Dampé from Ocarina of Time makes an appearance and lets you create and customize your own dungeons. This was such a cool feature, I first thought, but when I did it for myself, I disappointingly found out it's not a true custom builder, but more of a copy and paste builder. You can only use dungeon rooms you've previously explored, which is fine, I guess, but I see the problem that if you've already explored these rooms before, there's no real surprise, and once you enter, you'll usually know exactly what to do. Another flaw is there's no in-game online community to share your creations and play others. This is only accomplished via saving your dungeon to an amiibo, and it's just not worth the hassle. The whole idea of a Zelda dungeon creator is quite interesting to me, and while Dampé's attraction is a step in the right direction, I still feel disappointed in what we got. Perhaps one day we'll get what I really want. Link's Awakening offers a lot of fun and charm for such a small little guy. While there are high points of difficulty scattered throughout, the majority of the game doesn't have the same demands as most other Zelda titles. And I'm not just talking about the enemies, the puzzles that need solving, figuring out how to get from point A to point B, acquiring key items, most of it is easy to figure out. It doesn't need to change. Well, maybe the lack of difficulty of the boss fights needs to, but overall, this is a great addition to the Zelda library and is a great contender for new gamers looking for a fun adventure. This game gets a 4 out of 5 with the title of Awesome.